Добрий день, вітаю всіх, хто приєднався до нас. Мене звуть
Good afternoon, dear friends. I want to thank everyone who joins us, and it's my pleasure to welcome you at Ukraine Media Center. Today we are going to discuss an important topic, upcoming elections or future elections, legislative changes, and political trends. Let me introduce our speakers. Joining us in the studio are Vita Dumanska, leader of the CHESNO Movement, and also joining us is Iryna Korzhenkova, parliamentary analyst for the CHESNO Movement. Good afternoon, dear ladies. Thank you for joining us. In December last year, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, made a statement that after the peace agreement is signed, Ukraine is prepared to hold presidential elections given the security and democratic standards, and the parliament will be able to appoint the date of the elections right after the signing of the agreement or during its implementation. So we know that there was a task force that started working in the parliament in December, the task force that is preparing the elections that are going to happen sooner or later. You are part to this task force, and my first question is about the results. So what have you been able to develop in this task force? Well, thank you for your question. The group is working very inclusively and intensely because during the meetings more than 100 people gather, including members of parliament and representatives of the civil society. Now that there is a lot of topics, the task force was divided into 7 subgroups that were working in their specific areas. Right away, I want to state that it was not like a brainstorming, like what can we do when it comes to the legislation on the after-war elections, but we were working on the platform of the existing legislation prepared by the Central Elections Committee, and all of the subgroups were working on the improvements that can be made. Now, I think we're already through halfway, and now we start public representing the developments from every subgroup. There are only 2 subgroups left, and there should be a summary on your integration track, and thereafter we will compile our suggestions, but there is no consensus on every issue. Even during the presentation by every subgroup, the heads of the groups are saying we were able to agree, for example, on these 5 matters, but on other matters, the positions are sometimes opposite. What's important to mention is that there is discussion of the technical issues and there are so-called political resolutions. When it comes to technical nuances, everything is easier. Let me explain why. Because many experts with different experience, they can suggest the changes that are needed to make sure that the elections after the war take place successfully. But when it comes to political matters, the discussions were not held yet. They were still postponed. And even Alexander Kornienko, the head of this group, says that it will be discussed within a separate track, but in fact those matters that are being postponed, they are extremely important. For example, the sequence of elections. So what elections are we talking about first? You mentioned the presidential elections, but in a way that it would have been supposed to happen. First, there should be parliamentary elections, and then presidential, and the local elections that were not held in 2025, for example. That's a principal issue. Then, now that we talk about parliamentary elections, is the system changing. We hear a lot of conversations that the open list is a wrong format. Let's provide closed lists. So let's probably preserve majority system in a way that it was existing before. For me, it's an important issue. Yet another track is political illustration. Do we want to see people from the banned parties or those who were cooperating with the aggressor? Do we create any safeties for that? Again, what do we do with the people who left Ukraine? Do we provide them with an opportunity to vote? Yes, that's obvious, but does the state of Ukraine provide them with an opportunity to ballot? That's yet another question. And there's a lot of such questions that are accumulating, and there should be a separate discussion on those political topics. To me, they seem more important because they are fundamental when it comes to post-war elections. Okay, so now we're moving along the technical matters, but no movements along the political track. Well, we're moving along the technical matters, but not all of the nuances are perceived by the stakeholders in a similar way. Some of them want to suggest some better ways. For example, when it comes to security situation, which communities can be recognized as those where the elections can be held and which not. So there are good discussions about that. Then when it comes to register of voters, it's an important one too. So how do we implement it technically? And there's a lot of suggestions too. However, the work is still underway. It's important to mention that there are important political matters where we already have consensus. For example, that we're not going to have any alternative ways of voting. That was the resolution of the task force. And what do I mean? There will be no online voting. There will be no voting by post. And also, the elections will not be distant in terms of time from one another. For example, just in a way as it's stipulated in the legislation, now the position is quite strict, like no to alternative ways of voting and no to different periods of voting. Also, there is consensus when it comes to voting abroad that not only diplomatic offices can be used for elections. That's important for me too. So some political things, we're already through them, but the super important things are still pending. That will be the new frame of the new legislation about the post-war elections. So when it comes to use of DIA, there is a consensus that there will be no voting through DIA. Can it still be used when the ballot lists are being put together? Yeah. For DIA, it's a definite no as a tool for voting, but DIA can be used for those citizens who live abroad and want to update their data in the voters register. Also, DIA can be used for informing on the need to change the voter's address or something like that. So there was a lot of discussions about the possibility of the elections and referendum being held simultaneously. There are many statements like that made by our international partners, by the foreign partners who don't have a perfect knowledge of our legislation. So is it even possible to combine? Are there any tools to do that, and what are the risks of such combination? Well, good afternoon. Thank you. Well, I think that the matter of referendum as it is not supposed to be on the agenda because any referendum is currently impossible. Because what is referendum? As it may seem, it's a bulletin with yes or no ticks, but in fact it's tons of paper, a lot of negotiations, and we cannot guarantee that a person, a citizen, may be familiarized with all of the political, economic nuances of the matter that should be discussed in the referendum, the matter of the peace agreement. So basically what is being currently discussed by our politicians, our foreign colleagues. So the matter of referendum as it is shouldn't be on the agenda, and holding referendum and the elections on the same day would be a kind of a hindsight, because even despite security factors, we should take into account the technical aspects. For the referendum to be legitimate, the presence of the voters should be at least 50%. At this moment, the last pre-war elections in 2020 demonstrated the presence of a little bit more than 36% of the voters. So can we, as a state, guarantee a referendum at relevant level with relevant presence of the voters? So in the best case scenario, will 50% of the voters be able to vote? Won't referendum end up under threat because of the lack of voters? That's a huge challenge for the society, for the country, because it may create yet another portion of social division that we don't need now. That's why the elections and referendums simultaneously should not be considered, and at least referendum as such that can happen if a peace agreement will be discussed. I think the skeptics may say that it's an important issue, the referendum, the matter of peace agreement, consent, lack of consent. It will result on the presence of not only of the voters, not only at the referendum, but also in the elections. And with the naked eye, it means maybe like yet another piece of paper on top of those million prepared. So apart from the low presence of voters, what are we afraid? So there is a matter of responsibility and there is a matter of authorities. First of all, if it's initiated by the president, that's one thing. If we talk about the authorities, the parliament is authorized to ratify any agreement. If an agreement is ratified by the parliament, I see no sense for it to end up in the referendum. Then the referendum has an advisory function. That's number two. And then if the referendum will be held upon the people's initiative, we have to remember the rules. 3 million signatures gathered in all of the regions of Ukraine, and respectively, it results in more difficulties. I understand that for the state it may look like something as an attempt to remove this polarity, relieve the tension as a country, to say that as a country we've accepted to these territorial realities, but again, that would be an attempt to delegate this responsibility to the people. And Iryna was right to say that there is a huge risk of people not showing up. It turns out we're asking the people, and we cannot implement the results. But when it comes to turnout, we know that there is a lot of voters abroad who cannot vote. Then there is a lot of voters in the temporarily occupied territories who won't be able to vote. And there is another political resolution. We won't be organizing elections either in Belarus or Russia. Everybody who wants to vote should come to Ukraine from those countries. So some of the people are there. Some of the people are IDPs who are not yet aware of their final voters' address. So we have a lot of signals that there will be no sufficient number of the citizens to vote in the referendum. Thank you. And I would like to proceed to the topic of preparation to the elections. What are the processes that you're observing? Can we say that the political pre-election season is already going on in Ukraine? Do you see any political campaigns, and do you see any allocation of budget funds for such pre-election campaigns? Well, we can say that the political pre-election campaigns are never ending, because right after the elections, another new era of pre-election campaigns are starting. So the headquarters are working with, not the headquarters, but the teams maybe not as active as during classic pre-election periods. However, they do not stop, they don't suspend their work. From time to time, we at CHESNO analyze how the politicians spend the money for promotion in social media. And we had a study recently that demonstrated that the politicians invest more than 3,000 hryvnia to promote their online profiles. So this can be evaluated as classic measures of preparation. They're still in the field of vision. They know, or they tell people what they do. When it comes to the people's deputies or local deputies of the local councils. So the preparation is going on, and we cannot say that it's less or more intense now, but it's obvious that everyone is preparing. And let me add a little bit here. I know that the military, they have very drastic position that first we should end the war and then the elections, but we have to understand the terms. You know, when all of the fractions are gathering and they achieve some compromise, there was an agreement that the election should start at least 6 years after the end of the martial law. But again, we have to understand that for the people who will want to ballot, if it's about parliamentary elections, you have to have like military force. Meanwhile, you have martial law. In effect, you cannot register parties, and there is some political processes going on. Someone is getting control over the political personalities, and then you have to put together a team. We see such teams being put together in the regions. There is a program of veteran leadership. We talk a lot to such local veteran leaders, and they say that some political forces, even not the existing ones, but say conditionally the new ones, are looking for the people who can become the member of their teams in the regions. And there are civil organizations. They are registered as civil society organizations now, but they are looking for representatives, and now they've covered all of the territory of Ukraine. Like Iryna said, we see a lot of promotions online, but it's not only personalities who are being promoted, but also civil society organizations with political slogans. I mean, when you read those phrases, you understand that it can be transformed into a political story with a similar name or a different name. But to me, it seems that out of the Kyivites, no one can say that they've never seen any boards that don't remind them of the political pre-election campaign, like the boards of the 3rd Assault Brigade, with not recruiting slogans, but some broader messages. And it's not only about this formation, but others too. So there is preparation going on. I mean, you cannot say it's bad, because who's not preparing is going to lose right at starts. So something is going on. Another interesting thing that we've seen, you were asking about the administrative resource. Very frequently the politicians are doing the promotions for budget funds. So there are some formations that accumulate budget funds, maybe some funds from donors, and they provide aid to the military units, and those things are being communicated very actively. And again, the matter of help to the military, help to the families of the fallen warriors, it goes as a red thread through all of the political communications of all of the political forces. I wanted to ask you exactly about the new faces in the politics in the upcoming political season. Do you expect to see a lot of military or volunteers or representatives of those civil society organizations or charity organizations? We see there's a lot of information around them, something related to the fundraisers to support their security and defense forces. Can all those things transform, and are they going to have sufficient time to transform their activities? Well, look, when it comes to the new faces, I think that the Ukrainians traditionally have the demand for the new faces. We don't want to see the old politicians who didn't, who discredited themselves, or that you were able to see some forecasts with some non-existent political parties. So like last week, there were some statements made by Zaluzhny. So there is some intensification of political processes going on. When it comes to the parliament, there will be drastic changes to the parliament structure, because some of the parties that exist for the time being, some of them won't be re-elected, some of them will just cease their existence, so the parliament will be made of the new faces. It's important to hear from you your opinion about the future elections. Which of them will come sooner? Where is the priority when it comes to the members of the working group, if it really exists? Look, when it comes to this discussion, the sequence of the elections was not discussed, but this topic is in the air. In fact, what we were discussing, that it's logical for the parliament to start first, but we can see the pressure from the outside, and the pressure is on the change of the president. So let's put it like this: there should be no pressure from the outside on us. But again, if we look back into the year 2019, the success of the Servant of the People party, it was all preconditioned by the rating of the president. So for the existing authorities, the situation looks more logical when the presidential elections take place first, and it's easy to test the system in the presidential elections because the number of candidates is smaller, the procedure is the same, you don't have to change anything, the system remains the same, and still you have to take into account the interest of the state. What is more important for us as the state? And also, I would like to ask you, do we understand it correctly that all of the conversations about the elections during the martial law are not actual, and there should be some internal resolutions supported by our regulations saying that any elections during the martial law are not even considered? Well, it's obvious they're not being considered because there is an internal resolution of the task force. It was emphasized many times that as long as the martial law is in effect, there will be no elections. And it's clear because, first of all, there is legislation, there is constitution that prohibits us to do so, maybe indirectly, but based on all of the articles, it's impossible, and there is also legislation that directly prohibits to hold any elections during the martial law because the safety and security, life and health of a human being and a citizen and their protection is the first and priority task of the state. Even if we think that someone can set up someone can set up a precinct during martial law, and there will be, for example, an air raid alert. It will be closed, and it will create risks that the state cannot expose its citizens to. So the elections are not being discussed during the martial law. And as Tatiana mentioned, during the Monet dialogues in the end of 2023, it was all summarized. There would be no elections. The elections can be held only 6 months after the end of the martial law. Yeah, right. Let me add a short comment here. So when this task force that we're discussing, when it was created formally, we decided to remove this statement like elections during the special period. So there is a consensus that the elections are only going to take place after the martial law is over. And then the people are asking, so why not holding elections in, say, Western regions, like local elections? And then you have to explain that things like this cannot happen during the war, like all of the regions are the same. Well, you mentioned the details of the elections, like the return of the majority system. What are other risks or challenges we should pay attention to as a civil society, and to keep this matter in focus, keep it under monitoring, so to say? Well, on top of the war threats that are being widely discussed, I would also discuss the threat of invasion. Russia wants to influence us not only on the front lines, but they want to influence the political life of the country. We've seen such examples in Moldova and Romania, and the task force is clearly realizing it. And there are safeties in development that would allow us to recognize some part of the elections ineffective, or to suspend the election process if there is anything going on that would significantly affect the results of the elections. And there is a huge field for discussion, but this risk of foreign intrusion is still there, and it looks quite realistic to me. Yet another nuance is to give an opportunity to the citizens of Ukraine to vote. There's a lot of challenges related to organization, how it's supposed to happen, because as a country we don't have an experience of how to organize something bigger than voting in the diplomatic offices. So how to organize it, how to pay for promotion? Can Ukrainian politicians engage foreign politicians, or just foreigners outside? For example, if Boris Johnson is promoting some Ukrainian politician, a small disclaimer, no, he cannot. Can Ukrainians organize the marches abroad? Well, are they going to be safe? Well, but still, the experience that Ukraine is going to get, it will be an unprecedented experience when it comes to organization of elections in these extremely difficult conditions. Well, what I wanted to add, we have an army more than 1 million size, and we have a lot of military for whom we should ensure their opportunity to vote. And there are discussions going on about how to do those things in the right way, how to respond to any potential challenges that may emerge in the process, and how or are we going to be able to ensure demobilization process, how many people will be able to come back home so they can vote at home, and how can those who stay in this line of conditional division, conditional border, how can they vote? Now the front line is extended, and we understand there will be thousands of military who will need an opportunity to vote in somehow too. So you see the end of February. Now we're through February. A lot of work is done, but the next meeting was postponed until the 10th of March, the middle of March. Alexander Kornienko, first vice speaker, was making public statements. He was preparing a draft document that needs to be ready by the middle of April. But again, that's the first draft that will continue being discussed as a law. Then there will be the first reading. Then there will be a lot of remarks and comments, and then we will be preparing for the second reading. And it's difficult to say when this draft may become implemented as legislation. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for that information you've disclosed. It's really important for understanding of the processes that are important for all of the Ukrainians inside the country and outside. I want to thank you, and I want to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can gather here and discuss important things. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Thank you.